And as you can tell from that introduction, there is nobody better, I'm sure, in the society to talk to us this evening about how to be an effective recorder. Over to you, Catherine. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yep.
I haven't done a Zoom presentation before, so bear with me, please. Okay, can you see?
That looks good, Catherine.
That? Brilliant. Okay.
Perfect. On you go.
Lovely. Okay. Well, yep. So I'm Catherine, and I'm the bee, wasp, and ant recorder for Wharfedale Gnats. But I'm also a consultant ecologist in my day job. So, like we've just heard, in previous incarnations, I've been a bee and wasp researcher and a biological records officer. So I've got some insight into how wildlife recording is incredibly useful, and I'd like to share that with you today. Overall, I'd like to show you just how much your records count and what you can do to make them even more useful. So in this talk, I'm just going to talk about the journey of a biological record, where they go when you submit them, who will use them, and how you can make your records as useful as they can be. And along the way, I'll go into a couple of case studies. So why do we record wildlife? I'd say the number one reason is it's an enjoyable thing to do. We're all naturalists and we all enjoy identifying things and observing animal behaviour. But an important byproduct of that is that your records are useful. So wildlife records help in conservation. Where do you send your records? Well, many of them you'll send to your Wharfedale Gnats recorder, and many thanks to everybody who does. These in turn will find their way to a local environmental records centre. They might find their way to a Vice County recorder. Perhaps you'll send them to a local recorder or expert, which would be a Wharfedale Gnats recorder. Perhaps you will send them to your local recording group, such as West Yorkshire Bat Group. Perhaps you'll take part in one of the very successful citizen science schemes that exist, such as Big Garden Birdwatch. Some species groups have even got their own record repositories, such as the Record Pool, and that's for amphibians and reptiles. If you use iRecord, which is an online facility for recording wildlife, your record goes to the NBN, which is the National Biodiversity Network. Similarly, if you use iSpot, which is an online recording website, your record will go to the NBN. And there's loads of other online recording platforms. So later, I'm going to pick your brains on what you think's best for Wharfedale Gnats. So that's all a bit confusing. We've got records going here, there, and everywhere. But where do we really need them to end up? I would suggest that would be your local environmental record centre, because that's a central repository for a number of users. So from ecological consultants, such as myself, for things such as planning applications, and researchers looking at stuff like population trends. So record users then could be people looking to see what's in the area to tailor habitat conservation. Ecological consultants could be looking at mitigation and what precautions need to be taken for a development. And people such as ourselves produce atlases and fabulous publications such as the Wharfedale Naturalist's annual review, which is available at a bargain price on request. So this is just an example of a very recent publication that's come out, and that's based on just everybody's general wildlife records. So the State of Britain's Larger Moths 2021 has just been published. And I myself will be using this regularly for my job as a consultant, just looking at what the population trends are for different larger moths. So records can also help site managers informing habitat management, and they can be used to designate sites. So in case you haven't seen a SSSI designation before, this is what they look like. So a SSSI is a site of special scientific interest, and they are designated for a number of ecological reasons, but the example I'm showing here is one in the Forest of Dean. And the reason this one has been designated is because it has a population of lesser horseshoe bat. So basically, you'll see any development that occurs near this SSSI needs to take that into account and show that they won't impact it. And many sites have got designations such as these, and it's the duty of the local planning authority to take them into account when looking at planning applications. So a second use is also research. Now, I couldn't have undertaken my research without wildlife records. On the right there, we've got Halictus rubicundus, which is very dear to me, and that's a bee that I used to research. Now, I needed to look at the behaviour of huge aggregations of this one species of mining bee, and if I'd had to find them myself, that would have taken about 4 years of funding just to do that. So I basically depended on other wildlife recorders to flag to me where these populations already existed. So your records can show changes in distributions, ecological trends, and help desperate researchers such as myself find areas to concentrate their research. So planning, I've touched upon this, but it's an important consideration for all of us, especially with pressures on councils to reach housing targets and provide the accompanying infrastructure. So your records are, or at least should be, important in making these decisions. So all species are equal, but some are more equal than others in planning. So we've got species such as the hazel dormouse, bats, great crested newts, and some invertebrates, such as the large blue, which are protected under legislation. So this legislation could be, well, examples of the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006, Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regs 2010, and the Protection of Badgers Act 1992. And that's an act especially to prevent persecution of badgers. How does that translate into planning? Well, Planning Policy Statement 9 and the National Planning Policy Framework both tell the local planning authority that protected species and biodiversity must be taken into account. Now I'm going to mention the B word. So I just want to touch upon the implications of Brexit, mostly because much of the UK's wildlife and environmental legislation was based on EU legislation. So what's going to happen now? Well, we're still in a period of uncertainty, but a lot of this environmental legislation will be adopted into UK law, although there's obviously still some nervousness about which regulations might be loosened. And we have a new environment bill, which is due to receive royal assent in autumn 2021 and due to become live in 2023. Now, one of the most important parts of that bill will be biodiversity net gain, and that will require all developments, apart from nationally significant infrastructure projects, to provide a 10% increase in biodiversity, either on-site or off-site. So overall, when an ecological consultant requests records from the local records centre, they'll be used to either inform further surveys, and they can inform avoidance, mitigation, or compensation. And now I would like to touch upon a planning case study, which is quite close to my heart. Some of you might know me from my local toad crossing on Guiseley Drive at the High Roads Estate in Menston. So for the past 5 years, I've helped toads cross the road on Guiseley Drive. And in some years, we've had upwards of 700 toads, which we've helped cross the road. So this is incredibly popular. You can see that we get loads of families turning out. When I first arrived on the estate, there was absolute carnage with many toads being killed. And it's simply because they had to cross a road to reach their breeding pond. And in case you don't know, the High Roads Estate is an ex-mental hospital, which has been converted into housing. And here you can see it in its landscape setting in 2002 before it was converted into housing. So we've got High Roads Estate just in the middle. So then we jump forward to 2006 and you can start to see the beginnings of the conversion. We've got the additional housing, and this is actually going to require the addition of a balancing pond. And what a balancing pond does is it stops water discharging straight into a watercourse and causing flooding. So if we go through to 2011, you can see where the pond was placed. So now I'm going to show you some research which actually, again, used wildlife records as its basis. You don't have to read all of this, but this is basically a German case study which looks at the uptake of new ponds by the common toad. In this case, it was a pond they installed to stop toads from crossing a busy road. So between 1986 and 1992, migrating toads using the ponds rose to 99%. So in 6 years, most of those migrating toads have found the new pond. So if we go back to my toads, between 2006 when the pond is installed and 2016 when we've got upwards of 700 toads wanting to use the new pond, was that a problem that they should have foreseen? Well, probably. Here we've got a map showing records of toads up to 2006. And you can see from this that there are actually quite a few recorded in the area. So what the toads are doing, they're migrating out of their hibernation area in the woodland, and they're traveling down the beck as a corridor, and they're having to go over the road to the pond. So ways to get around them having to cross that road would have been to put the pond on the opposite side of the road, drop the curbs substantially, or put in a crossing tunnel. So why am I showing you this basically? Doesn't it just show that records are ignored? But I want to show you that actually these records could have been used. They could have been used in a really helpful way. These records are they're freely available on the NBN gateway for everybody to use. So I just wanted to show that this is a little bit of research we can all undertake to empower us to question and hopefully influence future developments. So when we record, we add to this picture and we build up a really useful evidence base. And before I leave you, I want to flag up the fundamentals of a record to allow you to make the absolute most of your records. So first of all, check where your records will end up. If you're going to submit your records to a local expert, ask them if they will eventually submit them to the local records centre. Be as accurate as you possibly can with your grid reference. There are websites such as iRecord or Grid Reference Finder that can help you with that. As a minimum, we need the 4 W's, which is who recorded it, what did you record, when did you record it, an exact date is best, and where. And try to get your record verified by an expert. And that's something the Wharfedale Nats recorders will gladly help you with. My final message for you is to keep recording, but something additional for your consideration as well is that I've set up a wildlife recording form on iRecord, which can be used to input records to the Wharfedale Nats recording group. Now, Wharfedale Nats recorders will have the ability to download the records, but they will also go straight to the BRC database and be further verified by national recorders. Now, I just want to gather your feedback on that. I'm happy to do that now, or if you wanted to provide feedback to my email address, I just want to gauge what everybody thinks of that and if anybody has any concerns. So you can find my email at the bottom there if you want to feedback to that. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Catherine. That's a wonderful gallop through recording, which is a bigger topic than I expected you to be able to do justice to in about 20 minutes. Peter, if I just go through a few questions before you wrap up.
Please, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, crikey, there's an essay on that one. But the few that have come in during the talk, Catherine, the first is about how is a SSSI established?
Okay, so we don't actually get many new SSSIs established now, but they were established from Natural England wildlife officers. They would have done wildlife surveys and basically a baseline, and that's how they were originally established. It's a statutory duty to make sure that they are maintained for what they were designated for.
Okay, and a couple related specifically to your toads. What happened to your toads, and how do they know the new pond is there?
Okay, that's a really interesting question about how they know it's there, and I'm not entirely sure. But they are, according to the research, incredibly good at detecting a new pond, and I'm not entirely sure how they do it, but I would be very interested to find out.
And are there still healthy numbers that you're seeing?
They're still doing okay. So we've got 120, and I've got somebody out there tonight covering for me. Obviously we've had the curbs lowered now, and they've got alternative ways of getting into the pond, so numbers will be down, but hopefully that's a reflection on them finding their way on their own.
Okay, and then I think the final sort of two linked ones are very much more about how and where people send records and so on. Should Wharfedale Nats members still submit records to the Nats recorders as a default? And really is about sort of how much detail and how often. So, you know, if you see blue tits every day, might or might not be what you want, but someone says there's an example of a peregrine possibly too near them, you know, how should they report that?
Yeah, so I would say definitely keep sending them to the Wharfedale Nats recorders, because they will send them on eventually to the local record centre. In terms of what you want to record, when I was a records officer, we used to get people that would send us daily reports from their garden. That's still incredibly useful. If you look, we're not sure of what's going to be useful in the future. So if for some reason blackbird populations really decline, nobody really records that many blackbirds now, but actually in the future that could be really useful to see at what point they've started to decline. So I'm a big supporter of reporting everything if you've got the time, because you never know when it's going to be useful.
Okay, and the very last thing, thanks for that, Catherine, is could you just put your last slide up again so people can check out your email address, because there's a few people wanting to be in touch, I think. At which point I'll ask Peter to wrap up for the evening. Oh, sorry, I do apologise. There is one more that I deferred from 2 weeks ago about whether what 3 words is useful as a location reference. I looked into this last time, and it doesn't directly give grid references, which are useful, but things like Grid Reference Finder can do the conversion from one to the other. So I think it's important to have the grid reference, and it makes life easier for the recorders if you actually give the grid reference. But if all you can get is what 3 words, it should be possible to work from there to a grid ref.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, that's me, Peter, definitely. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much again, dear. Right, well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Before we go, I do want to thank Catherine especially for that presentation. You can see why we were pleased when Catherine volunteered to do the presentation. I can't think of anybody else that the Society would have available to them to do a talk like that who would do it as well as Catherine has. She's brought all her experience to bear. And ever since she came into the district, virtually, I've known about her work trying to protect the toads at Scalebourne. She has done a remarkable job at High Roads, and she has done a remarkable job. So thank you for all that, Catherine, and keep up the good work. And of course, thank you for your work on behalf of Wharfedale, that's helping with the website and so forth. Before we go, could I just mention, Catherine has referred to it, the annual review will be coming out soon. You'll get an order form through the post with the April newsletter as per usual. We're not going to be able to sell it at the door at Christchurch until September at best, and we hope we can do it then. But in the meantime, do please order it by post. It's important that we make some sales to offset the cost, because John Stidworthy has again produced a quality publication, and bearing in mind those publications go back to 1946, then I hope you'll agree it's something which all members should think about purchasing and having as a record of our work. So thank you everybody. It's been a really great turnout for an AGM, much appreciated. I hope we have a wonderful spring and summer, and I hope you're able to take advantage of the summer programme when that comes out in a week or two. Thank you and good night.